is all the rage again, and in this three-part series we're looking at Bitcoin as money, Bitcoin as a ledger, and Bitcoin as code. This is the second part, Bitcoin as a ledger. I'm Rick Falking, and this is Liberties Report 42.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
One of the strongest powers you can hold in any society is the power over truth. The power over what is true and what is false. A interesting comparison is the wars over the printing press 500 years ago. It used to be that books were copied laboriously by hand by monks and nuns in monasteries, and each copy took about a month to produce and had a cost, in modern terms, of about a luxury car. Then came the printing press, which radically cut the cost of producing one copy of a book. The printing press, as devised by Gutenberg, was actually a combination of 4 new inventions. It was cheap paper based on discarded clothes, replacing animal hides. It was oil-based inks. It was the movable type, which is the primary invention we associate with Gutenberg, and it was the press itself. Once combined, ironically, it was used to print Bibles. This is ironic because the Bibles at the time were printed in Latin. As such, the Catholic Church had an absolute monopoly on reading from the Bible, seeing how the clergy were the only ones reading Latin and talking to the townsfolk at the same time. The nobility could read Latin, but they didn't talk to townsfolk. This meant that the Catholic Church had an absolute monopoly on reading from what was seen as the instruction manual to life, the universe, and everything. Now, there was a guy called Martin Luther who nailed his 95 theses to the church wall. It wasn't Martin Luther King, that guy came later. This was Martin Luther. And what Martin Luther did next, after having objected to the Catholic Church's abuse of the power of interpretation, the power of narrative, the power over truth and false, which, he alleged, they abused by selling forgiveness for sins, which had no support whatsoever in the Bible in Latin. So what Martin Luther did next was to print the Bible using Gutenberg's printing press in German and in French, which led to 200 years of civil war across the known world. Printing the book in a new language led to 200 years of warfare. The reason being that the monopoly on truth had been vanquished, but the privileged don't give up that power so easily. And therefore, there were 200 years of war dividing Europe into a Protestant part and a Catholic part, the cultures of which remain to this very day. And this is how powerful of a truth is. Both the power of narrative and, more importantly, the power of arbitration. The latter here deserves a bit of exploration. As people disagreed with each other in villages and Middle Ages, village courts were established. Various officials came out to these village courts and resolved disputes. They determined who owned what. They determined who owed whom what. But once the crown had this power to determine who owned what, that power was in turn used to force people to pay taxes. Do you see what's happening here? Once you agree that a third party determines who owns what, that third party starts determining that it actually owns a lot of things. And today this power of arbitration has become increasingly integrated with the legacy banking system. Enter initiatives like BitNation, which aspire to apply blockchain technology to a general governance ledger to break these nation-state monopolies of the power of narrative and, more importantly, the power of arbitration. Once you move these functions to a blockchain technology, the power over truth, the power over identity, the power over reputation, the power of arbitration, and the power narrative, nation states will find themselves unable to collect taxes. They cannot rule in disputes, no matter how much force they apply. And this is because the blockchain is not a thing. It's an agreement. It exists between people. It's just like a language in that aspect. A language is also a constantly changing agreement between people that only exists between people. And no court system can point a gun at somebody and demand that they change the meaning of a word. In the same way, no court system can point a gun at somebody and demand that they change a number in the agreement that is the Bitcoin blockchain. And this is still just a weak shadow of all the possibilities that distributed truth will enable, that the next generations will uncover. I'm Erik Falkfinger, and this is Liberties Report. Visit our sponsor, Private Internet Access. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.